All right, we're learning that when Donald Trump snuck off Air Force One in a catering truck last month, turns out he wasn't alone. The Washington Post reports the Deputy Chief of Staff, Dan Scavino, Executive Assistant and Trump's, quote, human printer, Natalie Harp, and also the Director of Oval Office Operations, Walt Nauta, all joined Trump inside that catering truck, headed for a separate plane, while the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, boarded the flight using the plane's external stairs. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent were sent on the decoy flight, along with policy advisor Stephen Miller and communications director Stephen Chung. Oh, and the White House press corps, who thought and reported that Donald Trump was on board with them. But they all very well may have been in some serious danger. U.S. officials told the New York Times that there were multiple streams of information on potential threats, including someone in the vicinity of the NATO summit spotted with a shoulder-fire missile. However, there is new reporting from the Washington Post that the CIA was skeptical of the threat before putting Donald Trump on that secret flight. One U.S. official said, quote, the reports of threats against Donald Trump's life, Israeli-derived, not U.S. generated, and they were viewed as low confidence. Last night, reporters pressed Donald Trump on his deceptive maneuver.
They wanted me to go on a different flight, a different plane, equal safety, but they wanted me to do it, so I do it. I do what they say.
Why did they want me to do that?
I guess there was a threat out there. I didn't really ask too much about it. I get a lot of threats.
Why was it too dangerous for you to fly on Air Force One, but
well,
not
I don't know. I think actually the plane that I flew on was at greater risk. I think it was at greater risk because that would be the plane I think that they would be more likely to go for.
You gotta be kidding me. Quote, this isn't a laughable operation to sneak away from the press in a catering truck. This was high-stakes presidential gamble with global stability and nuclear war hanging in the balance that indicates anew how much Trump's ego and corruption undermines our security at home and abroad.
I'm less concerned about the people he took with him than the lack of concern that he had about the hundreds of people on Air Force One, journalists and cabinet members. I mean, and there's a distinction between the two. Cabinet members and government officials take an oath of office. They're there, because they have sworn an oath to the Constitution and the American people, and there are risks associated with being a government employee. The press does not take an oath like that. They're there of their own volition. I have, as Ned has, flown on government airplanes into Iraq and Afghanistan, both as a journalist, as a government official. You know the risks going in there. They're told to you. Sometimes you're flying in on a C-17 and you're wearing a vest, so you know what it's up to. The people on that plane were unwitting decoys for a possible mission from Iran, and they were never informed of that. That's just callous disregard for something that they should have been concerned about.
Is it also a breakdown of trust? I mean, can you explain it, John, by saying this administration has so much disdain for the press, so little trust in the press, that they refuse to share information even about their own safety? And is that, we have examples of the press being let in on various sensitive things with this White House in the past, certainly during the first administration. Is this now, have we crossed another Rubicon?
It seems that way. I was part of one of those sensitive moments in President Trump's first term when he made what was supposed to be a secret trip to the DMZ. This one ended up being scuttled because of bad weather, but I was part of the press pool that day. This was in 2017. We were in Seoul. We received a briefing. Nothing was even said aloud because they were afraid of audio, perhaps listening devices in the hotel we were staying. It was all paper notes. There was an agreement that embargoes were agreed to, that nothing would be reported until he was safely there. The list goes on and on. Again, that trip ended up being canceled. He made a later trip to the DMZ, which I was also on a couple of years later. That's when he met Kim Jong-un. But this sort of thing does happen. It happens in previous administrations. It happened in Trump 1.0. But I think you're right. And there are two key parts of the backstory here. One is this, just the continued breakdown between the relationship between this administration and the press. They have no interest in having a good relationship. They've already hijacked the press pool. They've kicked reporters out of the Pentagon. They've switched up who's going to be in the Oval Office. President largely faces friendly questions. They have filed lawsuits against any number of news organizations. We could spend many minutes cataloging the president's assault on the press, including, using derogatory names on Truth Social. So that's a big part of this. But the other part is, I think this word was used earlier, embarrassment. The president was embarrassed about the Qatari jet. And that is the heart of all of this, is that he couldn't be on a safe aircraft to fly home from that NATO summit. He wanted to be on the Qatari jet. Secret Service said no. And then they had to take all these other measures as well. And that's the part of this. The president just simply being humiliated, in fact, that his prize gifted jet wasn't up to it.
Jillian.
I mean, the bit of irony in all this is that if they had come out and said we face a threat from, Iranian proxies or the Iranian regime itself, they probably would have had a lot of sympathy in many ways, because, of course, this is a president who actually has had a tangible assassination attempt on his life. And if he'd presented it as something, we're all in this together and we're going to have to try and take measures to be safe, there might have even been a slight rare flash of camaraderie. But instead, any sense of sympathy for the fact that he's under attack has been completely squandered by the way that was handled.
Rick, do you agree with that?
I think yes. I mean, they prize secrecy over transparency. If they showed a certain amount of transparency, said this has happened, then I think they would potentially get some sympathy. And that's something almost any other White House has done. I mean, we've had this long tradition of having a press pool, because the press pool is the representative of the American people with the president, who is the servant of the American people. One other point I want to make about what feels like that has been not really well reported here is this assumption that the primary job of the Secret Service is to protect the president of the United States. It's not. You go to the Secret Service website and it says our mission is to protect the country's leaders. And it lists 8 categories of leaders, including, of course, cabinet members and of course, the president. So it's not like they're justifying their behavior by saying, look, our sine qua non is to protect the president. It's not. It's to protect other leaders, as well as the president, which they obviously didn't do in this case.
I don't worry about anything, to be honest. Whatever it is, my attitude, whatever. I have a lot of threats. I have a lot of threats that you don't know about. Any consequential president has a lot of threats. Non-consequential presidents don't get threatened. And I think that I'm maybe the most consequential president.
The idea that Iran could threaten to fire a missile at Air Force One after takeoff is very concerning for the president, very concerning for staffers, and certainly for the fourth estate, the press. But I think the entire episode raises very serious questions about how the administration handled the threat and the risks it was willing to take with other Americans.
So, Congressman, to that point, what would you want to learn in a congressional inquiry?
Well, look, protecting the president obviously is paramount in these kinds of situations. We also want to make sure when we use a ruse such as this one that passengers are still safe on other aircraft as well. And I trust the military to do so, as well as the Secret Service. I think that if the threat were dangerous enough for the president to be secretly moved to another aircraft, which was a wise decision, we still want to make sure that members of the press are protected as well. But at the very same time, we don't want to cause the kinds of concerns that would have reports leak that would alert our enemies or our adversaries during this kind of exchange, to make sure that the principal is protected, but also that the fourth estate and staffers are protected as well.
Carol Leonnig, when you are talking to folks, Secret Service, current, former, how usual or unusual do they say this were? Was protocol followed here?
I like the way you're asking the question, Alicia, but let me flip it a little bit and just say, when I first started to learn about this jaw-dropping reporting by my old news organization, the Washington Post, I was impressed by this, absolutely impressed by what they figued out. Kudos to them. And initially, I had concerns and questions about whether or not this threat was legit and how much certainty, essentially, or how much probability the Secret Service placed in this threat. But in the last several hours, as I've talked to more sources inside the government and also those who are conferring directly with the Secret Service, I'm learning that the probability of this threat was fairly high. And indeed, the Secret Service was willing to add a new risk, moving the president from the safest plane on the planet to a different one to avoid him being potentially targeted. However, I want to emphasize something that I think is important to share that is news to me, which is that these sources tell me the Secret Service concluded that everybody on what we are jokingly calling Old Air Force One was exceptionally safe. The cabinet members that were aboard, the press that were aboard, the fact that they weren't read into this, I have some questions about as well. But I'm told that of all the aircraft in the planet, this one was exceptionally safe. But the goal of the Secret Service in this setting was to shake up whether or not those planning to target the president had room and certainty to actually achieve their mission. This changed the trajectory a little in their view, enough that they would take the president off the safest plane in the world.
Congressman, you talked with sort of reverence earlier about the decision that the Secret Service and DOD made in the service of protecting the president. Do you really feel you have visibility into how they came to their decision and how it was executed?
I don't, but I can say as someone who has worked in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, I sit on the Intel Committee, and I've traveled on some of these aircraft. There is technology that is available that protects passengers. Again, the press was protected. The kinds of transparency that is critically important should not be overlooked. It should not be minimized. At the same time, there are very serious security risks and threats targeting not only our president, but members of Congress each and every day. And I think in order to avert many of these threats to the best of our ability, these kinds of tactics have to be employed, whether we like them or not, whether we have political agreements or not, ideological alignment or not. We have to be read in to a degree, but I think whenever you have tens of people read into a situation, you increase the risk for a leak to inevitably happen.
Sam, I want to just play you a little bit more of what we heard from the president in that press gaggle last night. Take a listen.
The country's doing well. Iran is going fine, going just absolutely fine. We totally control the Strait of Hormuz. We have control over it. Nobody else, only us. Our Navy is unbelievable, and things are going great for our country.
I mean, the only true statement there, Sam, is that the Navy is unbelievable. Everything else, Iran is not going great. The Strait of Hormuz is not going great. And nothing is as the president described, being smuggled in a catering truck with your Diet Coke valet.
They're asking you to believe that the sky is green, that 2 + 2 is 5, and that there was no security threat to Air Force One.
Mark Polymeropoulos, MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. He's also a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Laura and Luke are still with us, too. Mark, so 2 officials tell the New York Times that U.S. intelligence picked up on a specific threat of a surface-to-air missile against Air Force One. Does that explain why they made the swap?
Yeah, Antonio, that's pretty dramatic, but in this case, it looks like that Air Force One, the original Air Force One, was at some risk, and the Secretary of State assumingly knew this, but the press corps and other members of the staff did not. And so I think the American people deserve to know how this decision-making process evolved. And first of all, or just to kind of bookend President Trump's remarks there about the alternate aircraft being at greater risk, I have no idea what he's talking about. That actually flies in the face of all of this. But I think that's just kind of the usual verbal kind of word salad we hear. That makes no sense whatsoever. He actually was safer flying on that alternate aircraft.
Let that sink in. Cabinet members People who took an oath to this country, kept in the dark on a plane, the Secret Service itself admitted was exceptionally safe, just not safe enough to tell them the truth. Because that's never been about safety. It's about control. Donald Trump didn't protect his people, he used them. A press corps reporting he was on board while he was hiding in a catering truck. A Treasury Secretary flying blind. And when reporters dared ask why, he didn't apologize. He bragged, "I'm maybe the most consequential president." Consequential enough to get a decoy plane, not consequential enough to warn the people on it. This wasn't a one-time slip. It's a pattern dishonesty dressed up as national security. And the man who broke this story is about to tell us exactly how far that pattern goes.
We want to bring in Washington Post national security reporter John Hudson, one of the reporters who broke this story, and John Brennan, former CIA director and MS Now, senior national security and intel analyst. John, Director Brennan, to the two Johns, as it were today. Nice to have both of you here if we can. John Hudson, to you first, if I can, for a second. Notably, the White House, the president included for weeks, has pushed back on any claims that there was anything up here. The president said he was taking the legacy, the bigger Air Force One, for, in his words, old times' sake. He wanted the troops to get a chance to see it as well. But your reporting shows that they were hiding what was actually going on this whole time. What's the rub?
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. This Air Force One is the symbol of presidential security. And instead of being that symbol, this was a plane that the president was smuggled out of on a Turkish catering truck. And then subsequently, Air Force One took off with all of the journalists, all of the White House officials there, minus the president and a tight-knit group of people. And basically it served as a decoy, a really extraordinary type of thing, and something that was unbeknownst to the journalists until the Washington Post published its story yesterday.
Well, I'm struck because we heard in that soundbite from the president, he says, yeah, you know, if they get me, they get you too. In this case, if they got him, they only got the reporters. The president wasn't even on that plane. Director Brennan, if I can for a second, what does it tell you about the seriousness of this threat from Iran that they needed to go to such great lengths to shuttle the president secretly onto another plane to get him out of the country, out of Turkey?
Well, obviously they considered it to be very serious, but I think there's still a lot of questions that, you know, have not yet been answered, which is the credibility of the source. You know, was it a human source? Was it a technical source? You know, did this person or the technical system have access to actual Iranian plans to carry this out? What was the nature of the threat? Was it going to be some type of long-range missile, a man-pad, like a shoulder-fire missile from the ground in Turkey? Could it have been, you know, claims that there's going to be an IED, a bomb on board the plane or something else? So there's a range of things that it could have been, but obviously they took it very seriously. But I must tell you, in my experience working for a number of presidents, and none of the presidents I worked for would have allowed the White House staff and a plane load of journalists to go if the threat was not mitigated sufficiently for the president of the United States. So clearly they have to take a look at the nature of the threat and why was it not able to be, you know, thwarted, you know, sufficiently so that the White House staff and journalists would have been safe.
So as John Hudson was just saying here, these reporters, the staff, they were effectively on the decoy plane that was, at least as it appears, they feared a potential target here. What responsibility, if any, does the White House have to those individuals on that plane to communicate to them that there is some threat and there's something they need to be concerned about?
Well, they have to do that. I mean,
is that a legal order? I mean, is there?
Well, certainly it's an ethical requirement, I think, on the part of the President of the United States and the White House staff and Secret Service to let, you know, the individuals know who are on that plane, such as when, you know, President was landing in Afghanistan, you know, keep the windows, the shades down, you know, take off on a vertical, you know, trajectory or whatever. And you would have been informed about the nature of the security threat, but to have this decoy. Now, the Secret Service in the past has used decoy armored cars. You know, and they want to have a president go off in a different black vehicle.
Right.
But the decoy is manned by Secret Service agents. They don't put individuals, you know, journalists and White House staff sort of at risk. So this is just unprecedented, certainly in my experience.
For its part, we should tell you the White House told the Post that the president and told MS Now as well, as the president has said recently, there are many enemies of America who have their sights on him, and we use every tool at our disposal to address those threats. John, one one thing you said to me before we started this conversation on camera was when you were reaching out to sources about this, including those who would have been on that plane, what was the reaction you were hearing from individuals there?
People were shocked. They said, "What? Are you sure?" There are a lot. This took a month of reporting by myself and my colleagues to try to nail this down. And there were so many really senior officials in this government who had no idea that this had happened, had thought that I had a screw loose and that we really were working on false information. And that's why the Post worked very diligently, step by step, marshaling a lot of the video evidence that you showed at the beginning of this clip to piece this together and ultimately confirm what had happened, which, again, is not just a deception campaign aimed at a foreign foe, but the deception campaign at the press, who represent the American public, and deception of some White House officials who thought they were on the plane with the president when the president wasn't there.
Director Brennan, if I can ask you, as the Post reports and as we have seen over the course of, 3 decades now, there have been other situations similar to this, certainly not like this right now. I think it was 2000. President Bush was going to Pakistan, and that was sort of a secret mission that took place. On trips when we would go overseas with presidents into war zones, a lot of times we would be alerted. You couldn't communicate it with other individuals, including your loved ones. You had to be at Joint Base Andrews for a trip when the president would sneak off to Iraq or to Afghanistan or the like. President Bush during 9/11 as well. Obviously, they went to an undisclosed location, but those on board knew the situation as it was taking place here. This one feels different, though, doesn't it?
It does, because I think the Iranian threat is going to be sustained. I mean, let's look at what the Trump administration did. They decapitated the Iranian leadership. They removed not just their senior government leader, but also their spiritual leader, and Ayatollah Khamenei. And so this is something that I think the Iranians are going to continue to, push back against in terms of trying to carry out some type of strike to retaliate for what they see as just this pattern of killing of Iranian officials that go back, a number of years. So whether it's the Trump administration officials and President Trump himself, as well as Israeli officials, I think
that's the real scandal here. Not just a plane, not just a truck. A president who will let his own cabinet, his own press corps walk into danger unwarned as long as it keeps him looking safe. If that's not the story of this presidency, there is no story at all. We're going to keep pulling this thread. Every decoy, every denial, every whatever he throws at the people who put their lives on the line for this country. Because accountability doesn't get to hide in a catering truck. If you believe the people protecting this country deserve to know when they're in danger, hit like and share this video. And drop in the comments if you think Congress needs to get real answers, not another whatever. Until next time.